Today is the launch of the RTX 4060 Ti, a card that is likely one of the most highly anticipated GPU launches of the last couple of years, especially as it comes in with an attractive $399 price tag, meaning that it's around 33% lower than the RTX 4070. Though will the performance also be 33% lower? That's what we're going to find out. But before we get into that, here's a quick word from this video's sponsor. Hello mate, you alright? Yeah, just got all the bits for my banging new gaming PC. Just got to put it together. It's going to be so much better than yours. Oh, right. What did you get then? The latest Intel 12th gen processor, a feature-packed motherboard, and 32GB of DDR4 memory. See? Miles ahead of yours. You realise that board needs DDR5 memory, don't you? Don't tell me you went and bought the wrong stuff. DDR4 is so 2014. I can't believe you was that stupid. What? No, you're joking. What should I get then? For me, I'd be looking at Corsair's newest Vengeance DDR5 kits, or if you're wanting that all-important RGB, then go for the Dominator Platinum RGB. Oh, you are a lifesaver, thanks, but where can I find out more? By clicking the link in the description below, of course. And you call me the stupid one. So first things first, while the 4060 Ti comes with 8GB of VRAM, there is a 16GB model coming later on in July for $499, as well as a 4060 non-Ti, which will also feature 8GB of VRAM for $299, which is also coming in July. So our focus today though is solely on the 4060 Ti 8GB, of which we have the Founders Edition and the Gigabyte Eagle, both of which hit that $399 MSRP. Obviously, custom AIB and OC models are coming and you'll be expected to pay a slight premium, but should get a little bit more for your money. For now, unlike the RTX 4070, the 4060 Ti uses the AD 106 based GPU and has a total of 4,352 CUDA cores, 136 texture units and 48 ROPs, which is around 26% less than its bigger brother. It also sees a reduction in clock speeds with a base clock of 2,310 MHz, a boost clock of 2,535 MHz, and a memory clock of 9,000 MHz, or 18 gigabit per second effective. Now, speaking of memory, the card does have 8GB, and while a 16GB variant is coming, I'm not entirely sure that it's needed due to where this card is positioned performance and price-wise. Memory typically comes more into play when it comes to higher resolutions, while the 4060 Ti should be more of a hit with 1080p gamers, especially given that under the ADA Lovelace architecture, we are graced with DLSS 3 upscaling technology to help boost those frame rates. The other key point is that while it uses a 128-bit memory bus along with GDDR6 memory opposed to GDDR6X, NVIDIA have once again increased the L2 cache to 32 MB like they did on the RTX 4070, meaning that the card is less likely to dig into the VRAM and system memory and therefore latency is reduced and huge amounts of bandwidth just simply isn't needed. So don't let the specs fool you, as NVIDIA seem to have found a way to make the card run more efficiently, while offering up great performance at the same time. Talking of efficiency, NVIDIA have managed to reduce the TGP from 200 watts on the 3060 Ti to just 160 watts on the 4060 Ti, though claim to have an average gaming power rating of around 140 watts, while video playback should only use around 13 watts and idle with just 7 watts. This also means that those wanting to buy an RTX 4060 Ti will be pleased to know that the recommended PSU size is just 550 watts. The same as the RTX 3060 Ti, of which it's replacing. Also, one thing that we notice is that while it comes with a single 12VH PWR connector, an adapter is included with the Founders card, taking it from a single 8-pin to the NVIDIA-based connector, though the adapter feels a lot more freely movable compared to what we've seen before in terms of more stiff adapters. NVIDIA confirmed to us that this adapter is rated at 300 watts, so what I'm thinking is, could this be the start of the rollout of lower wattage 12VH PWR connectors at 300 watts or lower? It's definitely something we'll be keeping an eye on in the near future, as even the cable inside feels a little thinner gauge compared to adapters that come with other higher end 40 series cards. What is interesting is, just like the RTX 4070, the 12VH PWR isn't actually a requirement, and that's evident to see on the Gigabyte Eagle card that we have, which includes a single 8-pin power connector instead, though for the FE, NVIDIA have kept with it. Other connectors on the card include a single HDMI and 3 DisplayPort connectors, so exactly the same setup as the 4070 and other 40 series cards in the stack. So for the design of the card, it's practically identical to the RTX 4070 in all but one way. The size, dimensions, connectors and general feel of the card is exactly the same. But in a slight change, the shroud around the cooler is now shiny and silver, opposed to a gunmetal matte grey colour. NVIDIA have kind of always done something different with the 60 class cards, and this just differentiates it from the rest of the cards in the stack. Again, with this launch, like other 40 series cards, there are two launch dates, one for the FE and other MSRP based cards, and then another for non-MSRP cards, which kind of tells us that NVIDIA are really trying to push cards that hit that $399 price point, which I'm all for, especially after years of pricing being up and down quite dramatically. So in terms of the NVIDIA card, there really isn't much else to say, as it's what we've come to expect from the latest iteration of Founders cards. Very well built, a great design, and at the price point that consumers are likely wanting to pay. Obviously, as long as the performance lines up with where we expect it to. So moving on to the other card that we have here, which is the Gigabyte RTX 4060 Ti Eagle. Now, as mentioned, it's also an MSRP based card, and if you want a bit more, you'd be expected to pay a bit more for the likes of a gaming OC or similar. What is interesting is that this is the first 60 classed Eagle card from Gigabyte with a triple fan cooler. They're normally reserved for higher end cards like the gaming OC range or above, or those with a higher class GPU core like the 4070 or above. Now, what you'll notice straight away is that the card is, well, very light and is more plasticky than the Founders card. That's not a bad thing, as we all know that margins are tighter for AIBs than they've ever been, and the card still actually feels robust enough. The triple fan setup still has some high-end features like the raised grooves in the blades and the slight hook on them that helps to kind of scoop the air downwards, along with the outer two fans spinning in a different direction to the middle in an aim to reduce turbulence. The card is wholly grey but has a slight blue tinge to it in certain lighting, which may put some people off, but I really don't think it's much to worry about, especially as this card is due to hit MSRP. Now, around the back, it has a full backplate that extends beyond the card with a large cutout for air to pass through the large heatsink. There's some Eagle branding and also a switch for the dual BIOS mode to take it from OC to silent, though I do feel it's a bit of a miss-sell, as the OC comes with the same clock speeds as the FE and the reference spec, and the silent mode is also the same speed too. Now, while I love the fact that it has a dual BIOS, maybe the labelling could have been a little bit better. Now, as mentioned, in a slight change compared to NVIDIA's FE card, we have no 12VH PWR connector here, and instead Gigabyte have opted for a single 8-pin power connector, which is still more than enough for the card's TGP. Connector-wise, Gigabyte have gone ever so slightly different from the FE, with 2 HDMI ports and 2 DisplayPort connectors. Though why? I'm unsure, though I wouldn't say there's a right and a wrong way when it comes to connectors. So again, the 4060 Ti, forming part of the 40 series on paper and to actually physically look at, I don't know, seems to be on the money, but does the performance stack up? Well, to find out, we put the Founders card across a whole suite of games on our GPU test bench with an Intel Core i9 12900K on an Asus Maximus Z690 Hero motherboard with 32GB of Patriot Viper 6200MHz dual channel memory. All testing was done on Windows 11, and along with various synthetic benchmarks, we also tested 14 games in total, and we'll be putting our focus on 1080p and 1440p, because it's very unlikely that someone is going to be running this on 4K, though we will include the averages for all three resolutions a little later on. So let's get into those glorious benchmarks. First up, we have 3D Mark TimeSpy Extreme, and here the 4060 Ti sits in the middle of our chart, offering up 5% more performance than the 3060 Ti in the overall score, and 6% more in the 1% lows, which then puts it just below the RTX 3070 performance-wise. Port Royal showed some strong performance that puts the 4060 Ti 11% faster than its predecessor, the 3060 Ti, and places it just under the RX 6800 from AMD by a small 2% margin in the score, and a single FPS behind both the RX 6800 and RTX 3070, showing that the latest generation of RT cores really does make a difference. So moving over to games, and first up we have a Plague Tale Requiem, where at 1080p, the RTX 4060 Ti came in at 85 FPS, placing it just above the RX 6800 by around 2%, and putting it just behind the RTX 3070 by 5%. The jump to 1440p actually sees the RX 6800 switch places with the 4060 Ti, now sitting behind at 65 FPS, though with identical 1% lows. Considering the 6800 non-XT is still selling for around $500, that extra 4% or so doesn't really seem all that worth it for the last generation AMD card. Our next game is Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and we see the 4060 Ti come in with equal 1% lows as the RX 6700, and just 1% worse in the averages. This also puts it 2% faster than the RTX 3070, which is a good start as the 3070 launched for $499 a couple of years ago and is still retailing for that now. If you're looking to play at higher resolutions, then 1440p is a similar story. The 4060 Ti levels out with the RX 6700, however now sits 3% below the RTX 3070, but does see a 9% lead over the RTX 3060 Ti. Next up, we have Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and we see that this time the 4060 Ti is holding up pretty well, sitting just 8% below the RTX 3080 and 4% ahead of the RTX 3070 Ti. Jumping to 1440p, we see the 4060 Ti actually coming in with the exact same average FPS and 1% lows as the RTX 3070. For $100 less and the same performance, I'd say that the 4060 Ti wins this one. The RTX 4060 Ti smashed through Control at 1080p with an average of 125 FPS, with pretty strong 1% lows too, making it only 7% slower than the RTX 3070, but seeing an uplift of 6% over the 3060 Ti. At 1440p, it's a similar story, with the 4060 Ti sitting 5% faster than the RTX 3060 Ti and falling 9% behind the 3070, though it does come in cheaper to buy than the 3070's launch price of $499. Cyberpunk is known for being a difficult game to run, but the 4060 Ti manages an average of 101 FPS, leaving it almost level with the 3070, though with just under 4% better performance in the 1% lows. We start to see the gap widen with the 3060 Ti too, with the new ADA-based GPU sitting 12% faster overall. 1440p proves to us that Cyberpunk can be strenuous on some systems, with the 4060 Ti barely beating that 60 FPS sweet spot that gamers crave. You could potentially enable DLSS to gain some performance, which we will take a look at shortly, though again we did find the 4060 Ti nestled between both the 3060 Ti and 3070 from last generation. Now looking at Death Stranding, and at 1080p the RTX 4060 Ti came in with 180 FPS average, meaning again that it comes in 7% slower than the RTX 3070 and with a small uplift over the 3060 Ti of 3%, though again comes in with stronger 1% lows of around 7%. At 1440p we see similar results, with the 4060 Ti sitting in the middle of the stack with an average FPS of 127, which is surprisingly slower than the 3060 Ti, albeit by 1 frame per second. Though being a newer gen card, we'd expect it to do a little bit better than its 30 series counterpart. In Doom Eternal it did so well, it's not even funny. With an average FPS of 355, it sits below AMD's more expensive RX 6800 and ahead of the RTX 3070 Ti with much stronger 1% lows than both cards. Bumping the resolution to 1440p and we see some pretty evenly matched performance to the RTX 3070 and 3070 Ti, though again the 1% low figures are slightly better on the ADA-based GPU, again giving a more consistent and fluid gameplay experience. In Dying Light 2, the 4060 Ti came in 3% faster than the RTX 3070 and with much stronger 1% lows, while compared to the 3070 Ti the performance was 5% lower, but again the 1% low figures were 3% stronger overall. At 1440p with an average FPS of 68, which puts it above that magical threshold of 60, again puts it right between the 3060 Ti, which launched for the same price, and the 3070, which launched for $100 more than what the 4060 Ti is launching for today. So strong performance at 1440p for a sub $400 card. Moving on to F122, and the RTX 4060 Ti comes in 3% slower than its last gen brother, the 3060 Ti, and also had significantly worse 1% lows. Hopefully this is just a bug being new hardware and may be fixed with either a driver update or a game patch. Then looking at 1440p and we see the same thing again, with the 4060 Ti coming in 5% slower than the 3060 Ti, and again with a 1% low that is much lower than I'd expect. The 4060 Ti did well in FarCry 6 with 5% more performance than the 3060 Ti and 5% less performance when compared to the RTX 3070, which in all honesty is where I'd expect the newest 40 series card to be positioned anyway. Switching to 1440p and we see the 4060 Ti now sitting 9% slower than the 3070 with an average FPS of 94 and only 1 FPS ahead of the 3060 Ti. For $399 that's not too bad for 1440p gaming, but maybe I was expecting a bit more of an uplift from the last generation. Horizon Zero Dawn sees the RTX 4060 Ti sitting in the middle of our stack, again, right between the 3060 Ti and RTX 3070 by 3 and 4% respectively. The 1% low figures are a little lower here, but could be deemed margin of error, though retesting gave us similar results. At 1440p, the 4060 Ti actually dropped below the 3060 Ti by 3%, and again with slightly worse 1% low figures too. Horizon is definitely a game that throws up some outliers, especially when it comes to NVIDIA based cards. For Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, the 4060 Ti moved up to the top 5 in the stack, sitting just 4 FPS slower than the RTX 3080 10GB, and 2% faster than its 30 series counterpart. Increasing the resolution to 1440p, we can see the 4060 Ti lose its place high up in the stack, and now sits in the middle with an average score of 94 FPS. It also comes in with a lower 1% low than the two cards either side of it, which includes the 3060 Ti, which now sits 8% faster. Microsoft Flight Sim is one of those games that just lives in its own little world, with figures that give us no real basis to analyse due to the severe CPU bottleneck, though DLSS 3 should more than make up for this. 1440p still shows some bottlenecking, but at least gives us something to talk about, where we see the 4060 Ti sitting just 5% behind the more expensive 3070 Ti, but does suffer somewhat in the 1% lows. Lastly, in Watch Dogs Legion at 1080p, we see order restored with the 4060 Ti sitting 10% ahead of the 3060 Ti and 2% behind the RTX 3070. A position that is kept throughout most of the games here today. Then at 1440p, it's the same story again, ahead of the 3060 Ti, but just behind the 3070, though does still sit well above 60 FPS, even on the ultra settings. So in terms of numbers, the 4060 Ti sits where I honestly expected it to, between both the 3060 Ti and the 3070, though in some cases it did excel in performance and overtake the 3070, and was knocking on the door of the 3070 Ti. With that said, there were also moments where performance tanked pretty hard, especially in the dips. Now as mentioned, this is likely due to the game needing patching or something that a driver update could potentially fix, but this may not be for a little while. Now what is worth looking at is the overall average FPS, and at 1080p again, it does sit right between both the 3060 Ti and 3070, but it's actually a lot closer over the 14 games to the 3070, being separated by a single frame per second in the averages and a slightly larger 3% in the lows. Considering both the 3060 Ti and 2060 Super also launched at the same $399 price tag, seeing an uplift of 10% and 46% respectively is pretty nice to see. Now at 1440p, the gap between the 4060 Ti and the 3070 widens slightly, now with just 4% separating them. While compared to the 3060 Ti, the new ADA Lovelace based GPU commands a 7% lead overall. Then at 4K, it's a very similar story, with some close numbers between the two 30 series cards and the 4060 Ti sitting comfortably in between at 59 FPS average. Not that anyone's really going to be buying this card and gaming at 4K anyway. Now moving over to money, and more importantly the value for money aspect, and looking at the MSRP prices, which I feel is the fairest way to do things, as card prices in some cases are still very much up and down. It's here that we can see that at 1080p, based on the US MSRP, that the 4060 Ti, even though it's the newest kid on the block, offers up the best bang for buck in terms of performance at $2.69 per frame, while the 3060 Ti comes in 10% more expensive based on its MSRP launch price. At 1440p, the trend continues, coming in at $3.72 per frame, with the 3060 Ti coming in 7% more expensive overall. Then, without sounding like a broken record, at 4K it comes in 6% cheaper than its 30 series counterpart, though it's here that we start to see some pretty terrible value for money on the older 10 and 20 series cards. In the UK at 1080p, the RTX 4060 Ti again comes out as the best card that money can buy, at just £2.62 per frame, followed closely behind by its predecessor, the 3060 Ti, which comes in 4% more expensive overall. Then at 1440p, it's the same story, though the gap does shrink ever so slightly, now with the 3060 Ti only coming in around 2% more expensive per frame. So I guess if you're already rocking one of those cards, doesn't really look like it's much of a worthy upgrade if you're planning to game at 1440p. Then at 4K, the gap shrinks even more, with just 1% between both the 4060 Ti and 3060 Ti, which both offer still significantly better value compared to the other cards that we tested here today. So it's pretty clear that this latest generation card offers up great value across multiple resolutions, but it's also one of the cheapest cards we've tested recently, so that kind of goes without saying, especially as AMD haven't released anything around the same price as this since, well, the last generation, at least yet. But based on our performance figures, this would literally spank the likes of a 6600 XT or 6650 XT, which come in with the same price point of $399 MSRP. Now, the performance doesn't just stop there, as being an RTX 40 series card, it has got, I guess, a few tricks up its sleeve in terms of extra performance and those all-important visuals brought in by Raytracing. It's here that we ran our tests at 4K to show the differences between the various settings, especially when the likes of Raytracing is hammering the performance so much as it allows us to kind of see typical gains in a worst case scenario when using upscaling technology. In A Plague Tale Requiem, we see a pretty respectable 9% uplift when enabling DLSS on the 4060 Ti compared to the same on the 3060 Ti. The RTX 3070 still commands a 31% lead over the 4060 Ti, but once we enable DLSS 3, we see the 4060 Ti come out on top by a single frame per second, and with slightly stronger 1% lows too. In control, the 4060 Ti again sees a 9% lead over the 3060 Ti with ray tracing enabled, while the 3070 only manages 1 extra frame per second. When DLSS is enabled, the 4060 Ti comes in 4% faster than the 3060 Ti, but also sits 6% lower than the more expensive RTX 3070. In Cyberpunk, the 4060 Ti gave very similar performance to the RTX 3070 with only a single frame separating them in favour of the 3070, though the 4060 Ti did come in with a single frame per second lead in the 1% low. Again though, DLSS 3 boosts that performance, this time by a staggering 31%. Spider-Man performed worse on the 4060 Ti when compared to the 3060 Ti when looking at DLSS performance by around 18%, though again DLSS 3 did claw back some of that performance, but sadly wasn't enough to compete as the 3060 Ti still managed another 7% more performance in bog standard DLSS performance mode. Again, maybe an update could help this game perform better as time goes on. In Flight Sim, the 4060 Ti pushes ahead of both the 3060 Ti and 3070 by around 27%, while DLSS 3 pushes out another 24% more performance, which makes it 58% faster than the RTX 3070 overall. Then lastly, in Watch Dogs Legion, we see the 3060 Ti and 4060 Ti evenly matched in ray tracing performance, while again DLSS pushes performance up on both cards, again giving matched numbers, which sits now just around 5% behind the RTX 3070. Finally, looking at cooling performance on the cards, we ran F1 for an hour loop to see how the cooler performs and keeps temperatures under control. It is worth noting that the memory junction temperature doesn't actually show, and after talking to NVIDIA, it seems the software will need to be updated to read it, so it's not something we can show right now. On the Founders card, the GPU temperature remained fairly cool at around 62 degrees, with the hotspot peaking at 74 degrees, all while remaining pretty consistent at around 1400 RPM, showing us that if you are wanting an RTX 4060 Ti, you don't really need to spend any more money to get great results. Then moving on to the Gigabyte Eagle card, we saw the GPU temperature reaching a slightly higher but still respectable 65 degrees. So a little hotter than the FE card, along with the hotspot also coming in a little hotter at 79 degrees, all while also running a little louder with the fans ramping up to around 1715 RPM. So there you have it. At $399 I was excited, and while I still am, there are some caveats. If you're running an older GPU, it's definitely a worthy upgrade as it offers a significant performance jump to those still rocking an older 10 or even 20 series card. Along with it, you do get to dip your toes into ray tracing performance and to alleviate any CPU bottleneck you have with DLSS 3. Though obviously this does depend on the game and if it actually supports it. The real sticking point for me is that if you have an RTX 3060, 3060 Ti, or even a 3070 and 3070 Ti, it feels more like a side grade opposed to an upgrade. Sure, newer games will appreciate the updated RT and Tensor cores that come included, but in standard rasterization, you could argue that there isn't much in it. Though if you can sell your older card for a decent price, then the upgrade path makes it a lot easier, as the cost to change shouldn't actually be that much. Now, though we've not shown any OC cards or custom AIB cards that demand a premium, I think it's clear to see that they just won't be needed, as the cooling performance on both the Founders and the Eagle cards are already pretty impressive. And while the Gigabyte card did run hotter and noisier, it still isn't bad. And as we know with most launches, sometimes it comes down to what's available at the time, so you won't be disappointed. But I feel like I have to say that the FE is the better choice if you're given that. Now, in terms of value for money, the 4060 Ti offers the best we've seen across 2 major countries and 3 resolutions. And while we may look at street pricing in some future content, MSRP is the clearest way to see how NVIDIA have intended to position their card at the time of launch. Now, value for money based on rasterization aside, the inclusion of DLSS 3 really does make a huge difference in some titles. And while we showed you how things look at 4K, you'd like to think that things may actually be slightly better at the lower resolutions. It will actually be really interesting to see how the extra $100 for more VRAM makes a difference, if any, in most titles, especially at 1080p when that launches next month as well. And also how things compare to what's next from AMD, which will be seen by you guys very, very soon. So make sure you're subscribed for that. It's nice to see how things line up on the lower, more mainstream end of the market, as it's actually been quite some time since we've seen anything that's really within the reach for most consumers. As we all know, not everyone can afford a $700, $800, $900, or even $1,000 plus GPU like we've seen from both AMD and NVIDIA in the last year. So, summing things up, the 4060 Ti should sell extremely well, as there are still tons of GTX 1060 users who have been sitting and waiting for this upgrade. And at $399, I think it's going to be very hard to beat. But who knows? Maybe AMD will pull something out the bag, or maybe even the lower end RTX 4060 non-Ti will offer even better value for money at $299. Time will tell. So with that, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, then a like and a sub to the channel would be amazing. And if you love what we do and want to see more behind the scenes content, monthly Q&A live streams, access to our testing data, a super special area on our Discord and much, much more, then you can do that by signing up to our Patreon. And it helps us out like you wouldn't believe. The link for all that is down below. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys.